Good evening, friends. Few thinkers and writers have the passion, the compassion, the understanding, and may I add, the following that Sainath has as a journalist. Thank you, Sainath, for a brilliant lecture, very insightful indeed, and I agree with almost everything you had to say. But thank you also to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share a few of my own thoughts on India in 2047. How will India look in 2047? There are some forecasts that are likely to come true. For instance, by 2047, India would have become the most populous country in the world. We'd have reached a population of 1.7 billion. It's also forecast that by 2047, India would have overtaken the United States to become the world's second largest economy. One could go on to make other general statements as well. By 2047, Indians will definitely be enjoying better standards of living. There will be better communications, more roads, there will be improvements in life expectancy, there will be reductions in child malnutrition, fewer families will be defecating in the open, and so on. At the same time, it will be possible to also say that by 2047, as Sainath has pointed out, income and wealth inequalities will widen, the plight of the poor will get worse, tribal communities will still be struggling for survival, conflicts will remain unresolved, the stress on the environment will definitely increase, water tables will continue to decline, and so on. Regardless, however, we can say with confidence that the mindless pursuit of economic growth, which this government is particularly targeting, will definitely increase incomes. Yes, India will be a richer nation by 2047, but we need to ask ourselves a more relevant question: will we be enjoying greater happiness, greater equality, and greater freedoms? I did mention greater happiness, by the way. Happiness means different things to different people, but that is not the point. Poverty, deprivation, and denial of freedoms are terrible for happiness. People who do not get enough food to eat, or who fall sick frequently, or feel discriminated against, can never really be happy. Similarly, people feel happy when they're treated well, with respect, and with dignity. Life would be quite miserable for a political prisoner, a bonded laborer, a starving child, or a woman who's denied the opportunity to even step out of her house without her husband's permission. I would expect that by 2047, the state would have done much to end such deprivations. But as a nation, where might we stand on equality and freedoms in 2047? I want to reflect on us as a society and flag 3 areas of concern and make one prediction. My first concern, and I'm delighted to see so many young people in the audience, it's quite refreshing and a change from the usual IIC crowd. Traditional norms and oppressive social behaviors are stifling the freedoms that young people enjoy and seriously undermining the enhancement of their capabilities. What do I mean by this? Today, suicide is the leading cause of death in India for young people in the age group of 15 to 29 years. As a matter of fact, India has one of the world's highest rates of suicide among people in this age group. And 2 other points to note. Young women are more prone to suicide than young men. Suicide accounts for more than half of deaths among women in the age group of 15 to 29. And 2/3 of youth suicides occur among better educated high school or university graduates in more developed southern parts of the country. Why are so many young Indians committing suicide? In addition to what Sainath has told us, there are 2 other common causes. One, pressure from parents to do well in the board examinations, especially for class 12. We know that students aged 16 to 18 are often subjected to undue pressure at home to score well in the board exams, as admission to college depends upon that, as well as subsequent employment opportunities. And when they don't succeed, suicide becomes a way out. The second common reason reported is the clash of values within families. Young people want to take independent decisions, they want to postpone marriage, they want to have a say in the choice of life partners, but this clashes with traditional parenting styles. Such a clash with traditional family values may not always lead to suicide, but it certainly makes life miserable and unhappy. To give you an example, in 2006-2007, 51,000 young Indians in the age group of 15 to 29 years were interviewed across 6 states, representing roughly 40% of the country's population. And the survey quite sadly found that almost half of young women were very unhappy or scared on the day of their wedding. And you may wonder why. The reasons, there are at least 2 obvious reasons. 35% of these young girls were getting married before the age of 18, and many were being forced to get married against their wishes. And 40% of parents felt that girls should not be allowed to decide about their own marriage. While this reflects a denial of freedoms to young women, what the survey tells us about young Indian men, and there are lots of them in this room, is even more shocking. 54% of parents, that is more than half the parents, did not even ask for their son's opinion when to get married. And if you think this is bad enough, 2/3, that is 2 out of 3 young men, were meeting their spouse for the first time on the day of the wedding. So as a society, we face a major challenge. While we may become a richer society in terms of incomes by 2047, the growing affluence may not have done much to change traditional mindsets that stifle freedoms. I hope, therefore, that by 2047, more debate and discussion on such matters will enhance freedoms for both young men and young women and help them pursue their dreams and realize their full potential. This brings me to my second expectation, that by 2047, we should strive to establish a society that is free from fear and violence. Sainath pointed out this, that political leaders and policy makers have tended to focus much on freedom from want and freedom from hunger, but not sufficiently, I would add, on ending freedom from fear. Fear surrounds almost everyone from the day they are born, be it at home, in schools, in the workplace, in the community. And we have socialized ourselves, as Sainath says, to living in fear. Typically, a wife is scared of the husband, a child is terrified of parents, a student is afraid of the teacher, a newly married daughter-in-law is scared of the in-laws, the street vendor fears the police, street children fear sexual exploitation. The poor Dalit woman in a village lives in a constant state of fear. A Muslim family living in a predominantly Hindu neighborhood is constantly worried. Many writers and artists today are afraid to express themselves freely. And the list goes on. And such fear and the experience of violence truly stifle an expansion of capabilities. There are 2 main sources of fear. One stems from the unjust exercise of power, that Sainath also referred to, with impunity by those in positions of authority over those who are helpless and who cannot retaliate. They may be children, domestic staff, wives, subordinates at work, and even, by the way, high-level bureaucrats who have to suffer abuse from high-handed politicians. The rampant and blatant abuse of power and authority with full impunity in every sphere is quite worrying. On a lighter note, take the case of a traffic constable in Delhi who stops a car for jumping the red light. The driver will roll down the window, look at him menacingly to instill the fear of authority, and ask, even as he is pulling out his mobile phone, "Jante ho main kaun hu? Do you know who I am?" This can happen in India, and only in India. If it were to happen, say, in Boston or in New York, the traffic cop would be baffled. He will immediately call the ambulance and tell them, "Here is a madman driving a car. He doesn't even know who he is. He's asking me to tell him who he is. Please come immediately and take him to the mental asylum." So, the second source of fear has to do once again with social norms that justify aggressive behavior. For instance, the youth survey that I referred to, where young men were interviewed in the age group of 15 to 29, that survey revealed that more than half, 54% of young men believe that wife beating is justified. And 25% admitted to having slapped their wives. So once again, we should note that by 2047, we will be a richer nation But we will not be able to realize the fruits of investing in human development unless we eliminate all forms of violence in society, unless children and women in particular can live without fear. Between now and 2047, therefore, we should do our best to create an environment in which everyone is treated equally, with respect and with dignity, be it a child, be it a wife, be it a subordinate, or anyone for that matter. Let me move to the third issue of concern, and this has to do with our declining commitment to public service and our deteriorating sense of community. Let me give you an example from the healthcare sector. India today has a very large and vibrant private sector in health. Today, the private sector accounts for 93% of all hospitals, 2/3 of all hospital beds, and 80 to 85% of all doctors. And we also find that though treatment is almost free in government facilities, except for some minor user fees, more than 70% of outpatient care and more than 60% of inpatient care is in the private sector. What do we know about India's private sector in health? When it comes to healthcare, Professor Amartya Sen refers to the plight of the Indian as being caught between quackery and crookery. Why quackery? A substantial proportion, and in some areas even the majority of private healthcare providers might be unqualified or underqualified. Many self-declared doctors have not even completed their schooling and have picked up their skills by working as assistants to pharmacists. For example, a study in rural Madhya Pradesh found that only 11% of the sampled healthcare providers had a medical degree and 53% of them had completed only high school. Why crookery? Many private healthcare providers indulge in considerable crookery by dispensing substandard and counterfeit medicines, prescribing unnecessary drugs and tests, availing commissions for referrals, and manipulating hospital admissions and length of stay. If you think it is only the profit motives that drives the private sector to cheat and exploit, it is not so. It happens even in the public sector. Take the case of the government-organized sterilization camp that was conducted in Bilaspur district of Chhattisgarh in November 2014. The doctor, assisted by a team of medical professionals, operated on 83 women in a span of 6 hours. Under appalling conditions, in an operation theater of a private hospital which was not yet fully functional and had not been used for the past 4 months, often not changing gloves or even sterilizing the instruments properly. 15 women died undergoing the botched sterilization operations, and 70 women were hospitalized in critical condition. How can the government, and doctors in particular, treat poor women so callously? But this is not all. The indifferent attitude of healthcare providers in the government facilities is further compounded by corruption and crime in the health sector. Take the case of the Vyapam Medical College admissions scandal in Madhya Pradesh. Some 20 courts in Madhya Pradesh are looking into 55 cases registered in connection with the scandal. Question papers were leaked, answer sheets were rigged, impersonators, themselves bright young students, were hired to sit for candidates, and seats sold to the highest bidder. The scale of the scandal is mind-boggling. Some 2,500 people have been accused since 2012. Close to 2,000 people have been arrested. More than 500 people are still sought by police. And according to reports, the roll call of those accused in the scandal is a staggering list of who's who in Madhya Pradesh. A former ruling BJP minister, the personal assistant of a high-ranking official of the RSS, a top medical school owner, aides of Chief Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan and the state governor Ram Naresh Yadav, the brother of a senior police official, top bureaucrats and policemen. That is not all. Some 33 people, mostly accused in connection with the scam, have died in the past 2 years. And 10 of them, strangely, have died in road accidents. I'm sure if Mr. D.S. Borker, the legendary civil servant and public sector administrator in whose memory we are gathered here today, he would be appalled to hear what is happening to our sense of public service and to our sense of community, be it in the private sector or in the public sector. Let me now come to my prediction, and it has also to do with health. Even though there is growing concern about pollution, chemicals, and other toxins in the atmosphere causing cancers and increasing morbidity, we are likely to witness unbelievable advances over the next 30 years by 2047 in medical technologies that will dramatically extend life. These include, for instance, developments in biotechnology, including in stem cell therapies, immunotherapies, and so on. We are going to see big developments in gene therapies, which could impact the functioning of the body in dramatic ways. Nanotechnology is likely to throw up new ways of repairing the body at a cellular and molecular level. We might also see new trends in robotics, bionic limbs, to add to our mobility, as the replacement of body parts tends to go hand in hand with artificial intelligence and whole brain emulation. So what are the implications? And here is where I will make a prediction for 2047. India's life expectancy at the time of independence was just 32 years. Today it is 68 years. Those of you who are in the 50s today, in the age group of 50, let's say 45 to 55 today, you are likely to live up to be 100 or more. And for those, this may be shocking, that this is my second related prediction, those of you who are in the 20s and 30s in this auditorium today, you will live to be at least 110 or 120 years old. The big question, so I'm delighted to see so many young people, because this challenge is yours. We are sort of stepping back a little bit at this stage. The big question then is, who will pay for tertiary care if we live to be over 100? Can we afford it? The principal approach of the Government of India and the state governments towards tertiary care seems to be to encourage medical insurance. Insurance schemes have proliferated in the past decade. By 2010, nearly 20 central or state-sponsored schemes had been introduced, covering close to 25% of India's population with varying levels of financial protection. For instance, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, RSBY, launched by the central government in 2007, offers to cover hospital expenses up to 30,000 rupees for a family of 5 members living below the poverty line. By March 2016, more than 40 million families in the unorganized sector were enrolled with RSBY. The Prime Minister seems to have announced on August 15 this year that the coverage under RSBY will be increased from 30,000 rupees to rupees 1 lakh. One cannot deny that these health insurance schemes have yielded benefits to the poor. But this is not sufficient justification for using private health insurance for expanding access to health. There are several serious problems with medical insurance. They often do not provide sufficient financial risk protection because of relatively low coverage limits and exclusion of expenditure on drugs, outpatient visits, investigations, which account for a large part of healthcare costs. Everyone also knows that there are serious incentive incompatibility problems. The interests of providers, consumers, and insurance companies are simply not aligned to maximize benefits to consumers. Such insurance companies tend to perpetuate an inefficient use of scarce financial resources, as the tendency in the system is to deny use, that is by insurance companies, promote misuse due to the moral hazard problem, and encourage overuse induced by medical practitioners. There are other problems as well, but I won't go into them. Let me, however, give one example of how insurance companies collude with doctors to cheat poor patients and make money. This is a story from Bihar. In 2011, it was reported that more than 15,000 women had availed of RSBY in Bihar and underwent hysterectomy. After complaints were received, the Bihar Human Rights Commission stepped in. An investigation was ordered, and it was found that in a majority of cases, private hospitals, government officials, insurance companies misled the women into thinking that a surgery was required. A number of hospitals in Bihar had carried out unwanted hysterectomies to pocket the insurance money. In May this year, 4 years after the so-called womb scam was discovered, the Bihar Human Rights Commission has awarded 18 crores rupees 18 crores as compensation to 708 women who had undergone uterus-removing surgeries under the RSBY. Lest you think it is only the private insurance companies that are cheating us, here is an example of how the public sector insurance companies behave. In July 2016, the Fair Trade Regulator, called the Competition Commission of India, CCI, levied a penalty of 671 crores on 4 state-run insurance companies: National Insurance, New India Insurance, Oriental Insurance, and United India Insurance, for indulging in anti-competitive practices. The order follows a probe by the Competition Commission of India into charges of cartelization by the 4 public sector insurance companies in rigging the bids submitted in response to the tenders floated by the government of Kerala for selecting an insurance service provider for RSPY. So falling ill and requiring hospitalization has always been a serious concern for the poor. Today, over 63 million people every year become impoverished because of catastrophic healthcare costs. And the reality of India today is that a vast majority has no financial protection to cover for such medical costs. So let me return to the question I posed along with my prediction that all of you will live up to be 120. Who will pay for tertiary costs if we live longer, as we are most likely to? By the way, this is not a concern for the poor only. It's a matter of serious concern to the middle class and to all of us. Indian policymakers do not seem to realize that private health care, even if properly subsidized, or private health insurance subsidized by the state, can simply not meet the challenge of universal health coverage. This is definitely not the way to go. Almost every country in the world which has achieved or is working towards universal health coverage has done it through the public assurance and public funding of comprehensive quality healthcare for all, never through medical insurance. Sadly, there is no buy-in at any level to the idea of universal health coverage, and this is worrying. So let me conclude now by reminding ourselves that by 2047, India will definitely have more people and more wealth. India will definitely be a richer country in terms of per capita incomes. But whether or not people will enjoy greater happiness, greater equality, and greater freedoms will depend upon 4 factors. 1, the extent to which we can all work towards eliminating the stranglehold of archaic customs and traditions that stifle the growth of young people. 2, the extent to which we can inculcate in young Indians a respect for equality, a respect for the law, and a respect for women. 3, the extent to which we can reinstill in society a sense of public service and a sense of community. Finally, whether or not people will enjoy greater happiness, greater equality, and greater freedoms will depend upon how creatively and effectively we can work our democracy at all levels to get India to move towards universal health coverage that is state-funded and state-provided. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share my views. Thank you.
So to conclude the day's events also after having introduced them, and I don't frankly know how much I can add to whatever has been said. It'll all be meaningless embellishments. But just to touch upon a few of the themes that were brought up, I think the theme of justice was something that stood very sharply out in the foreground among all that was discussed today. And it is, of course, a no-brainer, as the Americans say, that we should look forward to a just society in 2047, because that's considered that's considered almost axiomatic. You don't have to specifically mention it. But how do we reconcile a state of justice, reconcile a state of inequality, which we're seeing today, and a growing state of inequality, with that compelling need for justice? We today face a situation in which the moral categories are inverted. There's a neoliberal ideology which holds that progressive taxation, for instance, which reduces inequality, is contrary to the principles of justice. And why is that so? Because you're depriving the entrepreneurial class of the just rewards for their efforts and for their labors. So what is the nature of entrepreneurship today? This is something that we need to really face full on, because this is a much celebrated virtue in our current reigning economic and political philosophy. And I don't have any intent of disparaging all the many individuals who've actually made innovative use of existing opportunities and created genuine innovations in the economic system. But there are broadly three categories of entrepreneurship which you see, which tend to overwhelm the rest in terms of numbers. And of these, one is that which has made very creative use of the restrictions of the license permit Raj, the kind of much reviled license permit Raj, to corner benefits for themselves. And the biggest industrial group in this country, if you look at their record of growth, belongs very much in that category. There's another one which is used their access to natural resources and flourished from the exploitation of natural resources, often to the detriment of ecological safety and ecological health. And there's another which is found a niche at some point within the global value chain and has flourished has capitalized on the kind of depreciation of the exchange rate and become like risen to the higher echelons of the scale of wealth. So there is a principle within the theory of justice which says that inequalities are justified only to the extent that they serve a broader social purpose, which is that the entrepreneurial class has to justify the special privileges that it enjoys by delivering benefits to a larger social whole. Now that is where the cult of growth originates from, that the entrepreneurial class holds a key to investment and growth, and this benefits all. Now the issue there is that sometimes we do encounter purple patches of growth, as we had between, say, 2004 and 2008 or 9, and this does, in a financial and monetary sense, benefit a large number of people. But it also promotes a cult of competition, a cult of very harsh competition, this cult of pushing others aside with your elbows and getting ahead. And what happens when that bubble bursts is that you have no growth, no opportunities, but you still have a lot of that cult of competition which survives and which engenders a situation of very acute social conflict. I think that's the situation we are facing right now. So we have to negotiate that, and I think what Professor Shiva Kumar said about rediscovering that sense of community, to demote this doctrine of competition being the wellspring, being the mainspring of progress, and to rediscover the sense of community is very important going forward the next 30 years if we are looking forward to a situation at the centenary of our independence where we can actually feel that this has been a century of achievement. So final observation I would like to make is that we had a very vivid description of the horrors and indignities of manual scavenging from Sainath. And I thought back to a classic novel in the canon of Indian writing in English, Mulk Rajanan's The Untouchable, where he talks about modernization being the antidote to all the indignities of tradition and the indignities of the caste order. And he saw the flush toilet as a source of salvation for the people who suffered the worst of those indignities. So there was that modernizing vision which many of our founding fathers had, and we all respect them a lot, of course, but we have to recognize that they were chosen on the basis of a very, very narrow franchise, and they came to the Constituent Assembly, they propounded very general principles, but were they able to invest those principles with sufficient content and have those principles stood up to the changes over the years when it's become not a question of 10% of the population that has the right to vote, but everybody, universal adult franchise. And the kind of discord, the dissonances within the system that this has generated, have the principles propounded then stood up to them, to these new pressures that have emerged. So I think that is really the challenge, and that more and more imaginations, visions, that very frightening word, which Sainath is so terrified of. But everybody has that vision, and that vision counts. It has to be made to count. And there are millions of those visions which are competing for space in the public arena. And there's a media which insists on filtering out those that are inconvenient and only allowing those room for articulation that serve the purposes of sustaining this current inequity, the inequitable order that we have now. So there's a challenge that has to be fought at many levels. It's a challenge of refining those concepts, of investing them with greater substance and content. There is a challenge of bringing more voices into the public discourse, allowing voices suppressed to gain their articulation. That fight goes on, and I think it is not a fight that we necessarily that we can even afford to think of in terms of a time horizon of 30 years. It's a fight that is something that has to be waged every day going forward from now. So thank you very much for everybody, for the very enthusiastic response. I hope all of you got what you expected. Marquee speaker like Sainath, I've been seeing for the last 30 years. He never disappoints. And thank you to Suhas and to the whole Borker family for organizing this event. And I hope the audience will go home a little bit more well-informed and a little bit more committed to taking this fight forward over the next 30 years. Thank you.